Welcome. This is a lecture series for 8th grade English Language Arts. Please have paper and pencil ready to take notes. From this lecture series, you will take notes of definitions and examples, and then after you have completed the lecture series, you can work on assignments and worksheets and things like that with your teacher, and then you can take an assessment to ensure that you have mastery and understanding of this subject. Let's look and see what we're going to be discussing today. Today we're going to discuss the Oklahoma Academic Standard 8.2.R.2. Students will analyze details in literary and nonfiction informational text to evaluate patterns of genre. If you are not in Oklahoma, you can use some of the same language or terminology that is found here in this standard to locate a standard that is comparable in your state. Let's start with types of genres. There are two major types of genres, literary and nonfiction. Please pause the video now to write down the two major types of genres, literary and number 2, nonfiction. Look at the examples to the right of the genres. Choose one or two of those examples that will help you to remember what a literary genre is and what a nonfiction genre is. Please pause the video now. When you have finished writing down your notes, please start the video again. Great. What did you choose for your literary genres? Did you choose things like poetry or creative fiction? What did you choose for nonfiction? Did you choose things such as a blog or a video story or a web page? Perhaps even a diary. Do you keep a diary? That is nonfiction. Let's talk about author's purpose. For us to determine what a genre is, we need to figure out what the pattern is. So to figure out the pattern, we look at the details. The first thing we want to consider is the author's purpose. Why did the author write this piece of genre? Did they write it to explain something to us? Did they write it to inform us, to entertain us, persuade us to their opinion, or to reveal an important truth? So please pause the video and write down the word author's purpose. Now let's consider types of fiction. This is not an all-inclusive list of fiction. This is simply some items of fiction. What is your favorite item of fiction? I like fairy tales. I like science fiction. Do you read books from these types of fiction? As you look over this list of fiction books, think about some of the most popular books that teenagers are reading today. For example, what about The Hunger Games? Where does it fit? What about Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children? Where do you think it fits? Think about other novels like Harry Potter and that series, or the Twilight series. Where do these books fall in types of fiction? Can you find your favorite class of fiction? Let's look at the elements of fiction. We're going to write down the elements of fiction in just a moment. The main thing about fiction is that it's to enjoy. It tells us a story. You can find these elements, characters, plot, setting, point of view, and theme, all within a work of fiction. Even if the work of fiction is short, it will still have these story elements. It's going to tell a story. Please pause the video and write down the elements of fiction. Fiction is to enjoy. Pause the video now, please. Let's look here at fiction's characters. The person or animal that appears in a written work. So now we're looking at the characters within the fictional work. There are many different types of characters. There are 4 types listed here under types of characters. We also have listed that characters are protagonist, antagonist, and supporting type of characters. There is a lot of information on this page, and all of it is very important. Please pause the video now to write down about characters. One of the first things you're going to be writing about are the types of characters, such as round characters, dynamic characters, flat characters, and static characters. Once you have written that down, restart the video and we'll talk a little more about this. First, let's talk about round characters. Round characters are true to life. They are like a real human being. As a human being, we have many layers to our personalities, a little bit like an onion. Do you remember the main character in the movie Shrek? He said ogres are like onions. That is the same as with a round character. They have many layers to them, just like an onion. They are developed or defined very well, both physically and mentally. It's somebody that we can really relate to, as it might seem that they are a person we may really know in real life. When an author is writing about a round character, they really want that character to be real to the person who's reading. A dynamic character is like a round character in that they're believable, but they also change during the process of the story. They learn something. They become different than who they were in the beginning. If you have a story with a flat character, there's somebody that's not very believable and they have very little personality. Rarely do we like to see a flat character in a story. A static character is a character or person within a story who stays the same throughout the story. They do not change, they do not grow. They are the same from beginning to end. So we have characters that are of these types and others, but these are the 4 types we're going to look at today. As I'm talking about these 3 types of characters here on the bottom, protagonist, antagonist, and supporting, please try to listen to what I am saying and summarize or paraphrase what I am saying for your notes. If you need to, go ahead and pause the video now to make these 3 subheadings so you can take notes as I'm speaking. Write down protagonist, antagonist, and supporting. A protagonist character is the main character. Sometimes we call them the hero of the story. Can you think of a hero in a story that you have read recently that you connected with? Now, an antagonist is defined as a character or even a group of characters who stand in opposition to our hero or to our protagonist. They are against the protagonist or the hero of our story. Supporting characters are those other characters in the story who support the story and help the story to move along. It is rare that a supporting character will be focused on in any element of the story. Now I need you to pause the video and take notes on how the author reveals that character to us. They use direct characterization and indirect characterization. Please pause the video and write down these 2 subheadings with the 4 points of how an author reveals the character to us. Let's talk about plot. The plot is the element that describes the structure of a story. For a story to have a story, it needs a plot. Please pause the video and look at the plot components that makes up a story. You need to write these down. First you have the exposition, then the rising action, then we have the climax, then we have the falling action, and then we have the resolution. Make sure you're writing down the definitions of each one of these components. The conflict or the climax is one of these: a person versus person, person versus nature, person versus society, person versus self, or person versus supernatural. Please write down the notes from this screen to understand what a plot is. Pause the video now. Another element of fiction is the setting. Where does it take place? Think of the geographical location. Could it be Oklahoma? What about the time period? Is it set in the 20s? What about the socioeconomic characteristics of the story? Is it lower class farmers who are working for the landowners? Does this sound like the setting of The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck? Yes, it is. We want to define what the setting is because the setting usually helps us to understand what the author wants us to know about their story and the characters. Please pause the video and take notes on setting for fiction. Another element of fiction is point of view. It's how we see the story when it's told. Whose perspective is it told from? There are more points of view than what are listed here, but let's focus on these points of view. Please pause the video and write down these 5 points of view from the perspective of which a story is told and the definitions. The last element we're going to discuss today is the theme. This is, what was the author trying to get across to us? What's the central idea of the story? What is this story about? It usually gives us an insight into the human condition. It's something the author wants us to know about us or society as a whole. Sometimes it's stated directly, but sometimes it's just implied with the events and the actions that are within the story. Please pause the video and write down the definition of theme for this element of fiction. Let's move on to types of nonfiction. There are many types of nonfiction. Sometimes they are being created as we speak. These are the types of nonfiction you may be able to see in your daily reading when you go to the library or as you go about your business during the day. In school, we read textbooks. If you're in science, you may read a lab report. You may even be writing some types of nonfiction, such as a journal or an essay or a speech. Let's look at the elements of nonfiction. Please pause the video to write down the elements of nonfiction. Nonfiction is to learn. Please pause the video now. Let's look at some informational text and details that we may want to find within them. Informational text can be along the lines of a comparison and contrast, a cause and effect, problem with a solution, or a fact and opinion. Let's break these down. First, a compare and contrast. Please pause the video to write down compare and contrast and the definition therein. This is for cause and effect. Please pause the video, look at the definition, paraphrase it, or write it down. This is a little bit of a long definition. Use your skills that you have learned earlier in paraphrasing or summarizing to write the definition of what cause and effect is. We also have problem and solution. Please pause the video and write down the definition of problem and solution. One other element we have is fact and opinion. Please pause the video and write down the definitions of fact and opinion. Thank you for joining me today. Today we looked at an 8th grade English Language Arts standard where we analyzed details in literary and nonfiction and informational texts to evaluate the patterns of genres. In order for you to become very good at this, you will need to be able to read certain passages and then use the notes that you have taken to apply those to the passages you have read. Please get with your teacher to have assignments of passages so that you can read them and answer questions. Please practice these skills with your teacher and then take an assessment to ensure mastery of the skill. Thank you for joining me today.